Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin. Wake up!
It's honest, it's adult, it's realistic.
We have figured it out. Go back to bed, America. Your government has figured out how it all transpired. Go back to bed, America. Your government is in control again.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's the Jack Blood Show. I'm Jack Blood. This is No Agenda Global Radio. It is August 9th, 2012, Thursday. We are connecting right now with Richard Andrew Grove from TragedyAndHope.com. And Richard Andrew Grove, good friend of ours. I call him a 9/11 whistleblower because he was intimately involved in New York City on the day of 9/11. He has since taken up and promoted the work of John Taylor Gatto and others. The Ultimate History Lesson. We'll talk to you about that. He's also talked about the failing education in this country, which does make people, all of us, a little bit mind-controlled and let's just say it, dumbed down. His work is fantastic. TragedyAndHope.com. He is Richard Andrew Grove. Richard, do we have you?
You got me. Can you hear me?
Oh, you sound great. Yes, we do have you.
It's the magic of Skype.
Yeah, but some up better than others.
It must be the No Agenda stream. I'm going to credit the No Agenda stream.
Thank you very much. We'll credit all the hard workers, Gitmo Slave and Charles and Mr. Oils and everybody behind this. There's a bunch of guys working on this show even as we do it. How the heck are you, Richard?
I'm great. In fact, I just learned about the No Agenda stream about a year ago. I heard John and Adam talking one morning. A listener of mine had sent it to me and said they talk about it was either Project Constellation or 2020 hindsight, and they were playing clips on the show, and I thought that was pretty far out. I had made a note to send them the Ultimate History Lesson, and I think I've had that reminder come up for the past 52 weeks. So I'm finally going to do that now that I have the occasion to be here.
That happened to me. All my listeners, well, not all of them, but many of them were saying, hey, you got to check out Adam Curry. Remember him from MTV? He's doing this great show now. And I started hearing about it all at once, and then, I had problems with my other network at that point, and then we just hooked right up with these guys, and they couldn't be nicer. They couldn't get my back more. We got more work to do on the network. There are new shows coming on. There's new technology being implemented. I tell you, I'm really excited. We're going on Roku with a killer global channel here in about a week, which is going to expand our audience maybe 2 or 3 times. And so, hey, this technology can be really great. Sometimes it's not so great. It's a double-edged sword. But I like to look at the positive side of technology. Richard?
Well, over the past 6 years between my discussions with you on various networks, we've had a grand time talking about the corruption in 9/11, the AIG scandal, and it's just a pleasure to provide you with any historical analysis you need to help bring the context to these current events that are kind of wacky, but there's a lot of history to it. So.
Yeah. I wanted to, we're going to talk about I know John Taylor Gatto, he's not doing well right now. He's had a couple of strokes, and a lot of people know him. He promotes homeschooling and real education as opposed to government education, and real history as opposed to fake history. We definitely want to get into that with you today, Richard. But I wanted you to talk about your work at Marsh McLennan, how you found getting into the computer systems, how you found this evidence of fraud, and then, of course, what happened that day of 9/11, and maybe how the two were kind of connected, and then maybe how that connects to what we might be thinking about Robert Holmes, the father of James Holmes, and his investigations in software detecting fraud in the banking systems, and potentially even the Libor scandal, which should be a much bigger scandal, I think. But
well, that's a big task, but just make sure I end on insider trading and that sort of thing, and then I'll just give you the history on Libor at the end of this. From my side, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. I wanted to go off and live in New York City and make my fortune like I saw in all the Hollywood movies, and I attempted to do that. And in the midst of that, I had received a college degree, and I thought I knew what I was doing. I had run my own business. I became very successful in software sales. One of my clients was the world's largest insurance brokerage by the name of Marsh McLennan, and they were on the 96th through 99th floor of World Trade Center 1. The CEO of Marsh McLennan, Jeff Greenberg, his father is Hank Greenberg, who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank. He's a member of this Council on Foreign Relations, and he was the chairman of AIG. And so I didn't know any of this history working there. I only found this out in trying to answer the questions that come up as a result of my naivete. But suffice to say that I was making good money, I was doing well at work, and I had the contract with Marsh McLennan. And we were about to renew the contract, and as I get approval for the, what's going to be $1 million commission check for me, which I was looking very much forward to, I walk into work the next morning, the VP of sales had flown in, and he says, Rich, it's not your lucky day, we're letting you go. And I didn't understand, so I just thought I had gotten fired, that somebody wanted to take my money. Well, it comes to my attention later that the things that I was bringing up as far as questioning why we were overbilling our client and we shouldn't be doing this, that's kind of what got me fired. And I had these emails, and so I reached out to some folks at Marsh McLennan who were going to lose their jobs because the whole idea with the software that we were implementing for them was so that they could use paperless transactions. So they wanted to make everything electronic between them and their clients. And so it takes out human eyes on the situation so they could do a lot of funny money trading. I didn't know this at the time, but Marsh McLennan and AIG were tried by Elliot Spitzer and, who was Attorney General of New York at the time, because they had defrauded their clients out of billions of dollars. So I was able to put two and two together and say, there's more to this than meets the eye. Long story short, I was trying to return some of these documents to the people that were getting fired, so I thought they might preserve their jobs. I was directed to show up at their offices at a certain place and time. That happened to be Tuesday, September 11th, about 9:15, between two meetings that were taking place that morning. So I'm in traffic. I see that the offices are on fire. I didn't see anything happen to it. I just looked up, and I'm in traffic, and the building's on fire, and a lot of other people are looking up, and there's all this black smoke. And I think that's a tragic situation. I wonder what happened. And then, you follow the events on the radio that morning, and I'm being told that at first it was a helicopter, and then they said it was a Cessna, and at no point did it indicate terrorism. So I'm standing, I'm still there on standby in my car in this traffic, watching this tragic situation, being naive. And then when I had tried to turn and get out of this traffic, I'm in between World Trade Center 1 and World Trade Center 7 and World Trade Center 6. So as Tower 2 blows up, I see the explosion in Tower 2, and I see explosions in World Trade Center 6, which I found out later is the customs house, at the same time. And at that point, I realized I didn't have enough information on this situation. I needed to remove myself because it was a dangerous situation. I couldn't figure out how to be safe in this situation. So I left the city right then, and I drove to a friend's place in New Jersey. And then by the time I had gotten there, we watched it on TV and saw the towers come down. A month later, I noticed there's insider trading going on with Marsh McLennan and American Airlines in the weeks before 9/11, and I'm scratching my head thinking, how did the Muslim terrorists do that? Like, they're pretty wily. And then when you get to the bottom of who's in these transactions, it's the ex-director of the CIA and Buzzy Krongard, who was he was a chairman or an executive at AB Brown, which was purchased by Deutsche Bank, which was also one of our clients. And that was the first customer that we had provided this software capability for, and that's what we used to prove to Marsh McLennan that we could also build them a unique custom platform like we did for Deutsche Bank. So then after that, I really started digging into history and, started reading a lot more books, and I realized, I had run up against reality, and the ideas that I had been given to be prepared for life through education did not suffice in the situation of reality. And along that way of researching and figuring this out for myself, I bumped into the invaluable work of John Taylor Gatto, and after many years of reading his books, that culminated last summer with the Ultimate History Lesson. Now, the insider trading, if you want to get into the history, that's where the Libor, it's the London interbank borrowing rate. Now, I'm going to just read it's not even 2 pages, it's like 2 paragraphs, but it goes on pages 206 and 207 of a book called The Secrets of the Federal Reserve.
Eustace Mullins, yeah.
Right. Now, at the top of page 206 in the PDF copy that's available on archive.org, it talks about the Libor, the London Interbank Borrowing Rate, and how this plays into the whole Euro empire that they're creating. At the bottom of that page, it starts into psychological warfare. Now, continuing on to the next page, I'll just read from the middle paragraph. The Tavistock Institute was taken over by Sir John Rawlings Rees, who was the head of British Army Psychological Warfare Bureau. Continuing on, according to LaRouche and other authorities, this group, Tavistock, organized and trained the entire staffs of the OSS, the Strategic Bombing Survey, Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, And continuing on, the Tavistock Institute combined with Medical Sciences Division of the Rockefeller Foundation for esoteric experiments with mind-altering drugs. Continuing on the same page, the LSD counterculture was originated when Sandoz AG, a Swiss pharmaceutical house owned by S.G. Warburg and Company, developed a new drug called LSD. James Paul Warburg, the son of Paul Warburg, who had written the Federal Reserve Act in 1910, financed a subsidiary of the Tavistock Institute in the United States called the Institute for Policy Studies, whose director, Marcus Raskin, was appointed to the National Security Council. James Paul Warburg set up a CIA program to experiment with LSD on CIA agents, some of whom later died and committed suicide. That's the claim. That's Frank Olson he's referring to. This program, MK Ultra, supervised by Dr. Gottlieb, resulted in large lawsuits against the United States government and families of the victims. Now, rather than finance the policy for studies, they created the Students for Democratic Society, which Warburg used CIA funds, some $20 million, to promote the campus riots of the 1960s. Continuing on, the Tavistock Institute has funded the Herbert Hoover Institute at Stanford University, and that's where whistleblower Anthony Sutton worked until he found out that the international bankers were funding the Bolshevik Revolution, FDR, and Hitler at the same time. He got fired. They also fund the Wharton Hudson, Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Rand Corporation, right? So just from reading the last 3 pages in Secrets of the Federal Reserve, which everyone listening to your show should have already read by now, it's a classic book to understand the money system, the political system, everything that we're talking about with any of the psychological warfare stems back from the need for the international bankers to obscure their plans. How am I doing?
Fantastic. You know, I have an autographed copy of the book, and we had Eustace on a bunch of times. And, of course, because of the information that he put out, much of which was inspired by Ezra Pound, who was a political prisoner, as a famous poet, a famous author, held by American authorities in, I think, Bethesda, Maryland, in a military psychiatric
They held
ward.
him in Italy first. They kept him in a cage, because I had read this 6 months ago. I reread up on Ezra Pound's Wikipedia page, and then I went into the research, because it had first occurred to me when I checked out Eustace Mullins. I'm like, wow, well, this guy's a bit of a racist, and I'm not sure. But I just reread Secrets of the Federal Reserve a couple weeks ago in a couple hours. I highlighted the whole thing because now I have context for all the people he's referring to. And then I discovered that in the years since I first encountered his work and thought, oh, I don't know about this, to now I've heard Jan Irvin's interviews on Gnostic Media with Eustace. I've heard your interviews with Eustace. And when looking at this one specific book, and not judging the messenger, I'm just looking at the message, he continuously refers to the private letters of Colonel House published by Charles Seymour. It's a 4-volume set from Yale University. I have a first edition copy of it. I read that years ago, but what Mullins is doing, he's like, look, Warburg is the handler of Colonel House, who's the handler of Wilson, and it's in the private papers. And Wilson and House are saying, my first call this morning was from Paul Warburg. He's telling me to do this. And I had just missed it because I didn't have the context for the Warburg family. I read the Ron Chernow book years ago, and I didn't have enough context to understand it. I reread it a couple weeks ago. I did a whole podcast on this. And in there, you find out that the Warburg family made all of their money from the Rothschild family after this one financial depression because they were the specialists in handling metals in Hanover, and they became a trusted family. And they've been working with the Rothschilds for hundreds of years by their own account, by the official biographers for their own family. So this isn't propaganda from the Internet. This is me reading the biographies and autobiographies of the international bankers for the last 200 years.
But what I was going to say, though,
60 or 70 books on this, so
it's
so
more
than what people
easy
think.
to demonize Eustace Mullins or to demonize myself, you, David Icke, or Ezra Pound because the international bankers happen to be Jewish. I don't think anyone is saying that this is these guys, they weren't intimating exactly that this is a big Jewish conspiracy. What they're saying is, hey man, these guys hide behind this, and of course what happened to Eustace Mullins, the finger was pointed at him as being a white supremacist, a racist, and that's an easy way to discredit this body of work of which we wouldn't have G. Edward Griffin's work, or we wouldn't have Ron Paul talking about the Federal Reserve. We wouldn't have any of this.
Jekyll Island book is totally based on Eustace Mullins, shorter, more succinct, more credible in my opinion, because if you read into the footnotes, Mullins worked in the Library of Congress, so that's where his information is coming. So I didn't detect a shred of racism in that specific book, Secrets of the Federal Reserve. I have not seen evidence that it has been a single religious group, so I don't go that direction. What I have evidence of is the people in their own words who say it's an Anglo-American conspiracy, right? It's Cecil Rhodes, it's Lord Rothschild says it like this. I mean, I have a quote here from a book on the Rhodes Scholars, Oxford and the Creation of American Elite. It's a very short quote. Said, Lord Rothschild asserted that Rhodes was, quote, a very great man who saw things that no one else saw and foresaw things which no one else dreamt of. His great generosity bewitched those who came into contact with him. His loss would be irreparable were it not for the fact that he put into motion ideas which have taken root, ideas firmly established, which will continue to grow and flourish. And then I've got another book, which I'm not going to read from. No one be scared. Don't run off. But I have another book by Oxford University by Sir Anthony Kenny. It's called The History of the Rhodes Trust. In the back of the book, it says that Rhodes was funded by Lord Rothschild and the Rothschild Empire, and his will left it all back to them, and that really the Rhodes scholars are the Rothschild scholars.
Sure.
So that's where I'm working from. So it's not one religious group.
But what did Cecil Rhodes say? What was the Rhodes scholarship all about? Was to train people to create world government that would be in the control of the usual suspects in Great Britain and England. And then what do we see with the Libor, as you mentioned, the London interbank borrowing rate, which sets the for banks, for Citibanks, New York, all over the world, the borrowing rate, the credit, and credit is money to these people, folks. We have to remember that. I'm actually rereading myself the book that was written about this glorifying of Alan Greenspan in charge of the Federal Reserve and how they tinkered with the economy constantly. I mean, any bad day of the stock market, they were tinkering and they were working, and he was getting inside information to wars, but it's all just wonderful because he's saving the economy. He's not controlling it.
Well, there's a plan for the economy well ahead of time. So, for instance, the way Ben Bernanke got his job is he's in the inner circle. He understands the trend, and then he wrote a plan that said, if this were to happen, here's how I would handle it. And they're like, oh, that's exactly what we want to happen, so you're going to get the job. Now, here's another case study. Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1968 writes, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. In there, technotronic, by the way, means that's his word for the post-industrial age, right? So that's the age we're in, where they're going to try to use cybernetics and technocracy to take control of everybody, and that's Agenda 21. This is a history behind it. He writes this book, and David Rockefeller reads it, and he's like, this is exactly what I want to do. Why don't you and I create the Trilateral Commission, and then we'll buy off some international other bankers, we'll get them involved, and then we'll make Jimmy Carter the president, right? This is all in Barry Goldwater's memoirs, right? Autobiography, memoirs, biographies. This is where you want to go. Chapter 33 are non-elected rulers, and then Chapter 34 is how they got Jimmy Carter elected. It was Brzezinski and Rockefeller, and Barry Goldwater was witness to all this, but he couldn't get the word out, so at least he wrote an autobiography. And
he was called a racist, and he was called a racist, and he was called a kook, and this is just, I can't believe this still works. Let me go back to Libor just for a second here, because again, we're talking about these people that use credit for money, that to create money out of thin air. I mean, we've got quadrillions of dollars missing, allegedly. We've got 16 trillion, sorry for the convoluted questions, Richard, but let me just throw all this out here for my listeners who may just be listening for the first time. Who knows? $16 trillion just in the last year or two going to Europe to, quote-unquote, bail them out, ones and zeros. So when you can control the Libor rate, when you can do all of this and monkey around with it, you can loan yourself money at no interest, which is what they're doing with this, what do they call it, the open window overnight loan policies, which is how all these guys are getting all this money to play with, buying low after they created the end of the boom. So now
you can connect Libor to the naked short selling, to the derivatives. I mean, I did an interview with. Oh, go ahead.
So let me finish the question. I'm just putting my own little historical facts out for people so they understand, where we're going and what we're talking about, and I'm hoping that they can keep up. Because now we have Robert Holmes, the father again of James Holmes, who is working at FICO, according to his own page at LinkedIn. I mean, he's just talking about this. What he says. FICO has been developing predictive models for financial services, credit and fraud risk models, first and third-party application fraud models, internet online banking fraud models, His management experience, he works at Falcon Fraud Manager, credit card fraud models, managed teams at Telco, identity theft fraud, and FICO is investigating Libor. That we know. This is the guy that has the software that would have found the anomalies in Libor to call these guys out to start the investigation. Now, the coincidence here, and we see this all the time, is in The Dark Knight Rises, where allegedly Robert Holmes' son goes in, and no witnesses, but let's just take the media's word for it here, goes in and shoots up a theater of random victims. In the movie Dark Knight Rises, which is a reference to Phoenix, by the way, he gets his hands on software that is used to expose the fraud in Wall Street and guts the rich. It actually, this whole thing, Holmes, his dad, the plot, the location even of Aurora, Colorado, it all fits in with the movie. I mean, how can this happen? How could these coincidences all lock in for this one deal? What is your opinion? I mean, are you following this Robert Holmes at FICO story? Because it was a huge story. And do you think that this could have something to do with it? The implication being they used this kid, they went after this kid who was, by the way, studying the brain sciences at a very high level, and to use him against his father in order to either distract him or as a threat directly not to testify, not to keep investigating into Libor, London banks fixing credit ratings?
Well, I'm going to start with a quote from John Taylor Gatto. He says, "You either learn how to write your own script in life, or you unwittingly become an actor in someone else's script. What you are describing, as far as PsyWAR and current events, these are people who do not think for themselves, who do not ask the questions and find the substantial answers, and thus they are very easily influenced. This is the whole purpose of PsyWAR. It's Bernays, it's Lippmann, it's propaganda. It's called PsyWAR during wartime, but they call it, time life during peacetime. They are waging total war. So this is von Clausewitz's strategy developed prior to the Prussian education system being developed, and they're hitting us from every angle: our air, our food, our water, our food, our shelter, our rights. Everything is being adversely affected. They're doing multiple steps at once. So where do we begin to gain a little context? Well, on that situation in Colorado, how did the alleged shooter or that team of shooters, any of this stuff, know that Gangster Squad was going to be showing the trailer, and that in the trailer people were being shot up in the theater, and that's just enough to make people stop and not panic while they're getting shot, and it gives you a lot of easy prey. So I don't think anybody who walked in there with $20,000 worth of military equipment had also control over what trailers were showing there, and that tells me that's the beginning of the PSYOP. As far
going
as,
back to the drills on 9/11 and the insider trading you
Sure.
found and the fraud you found working in the computer systems of Marsh McLennan.
Okay, so I'll even move a step past that. You remember the Tyco and the Enron frauds?
Yeah.
All those big things? Okay, so this Sarbanes-Oxley was legislation that came out in 2002, and an act of Congress to prevent that from ever happening again. And after what I experienced at Marsh McLennan, which is all in Project Constellation, it's found on my website, tragedyandhope.com, so you can listen to that anytime. What's not in there is that the aspects of this Sarbanes-Oxley Act, when they are going about trying to prevent that from ever happening again, I go and sell that software. So my clients are the biggest financial institutions in the world. JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, all these places are mandated by Congress to get this software. So I'm in a meeting with Tyco International, and I'm meeting with the chief general counsel. I'm not going to say her name on live radio because that's bad business, but it's in Project Constellation and it's out there, so I'm not hiding it. I'm just not going to aggravate a lawyer. In the meeting, I'm explaining how you're under FBI mandate not to delete any data. Here's how our software does that. Here's how you can lower your costs. And she stops me and says, I don't want to do that. I want to know how to delete this data and not get caught, right? And at which point another person at the table who's been at the company longer says, oh, yeah, I can help you with that offline. It was one of my first meetings, right? And so from there, my second whistleblowing experience starts, where I'm going through under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act as a whistleblower who sold Sarbanes-Oxley software to prevent this fraud from going on. And the SEC, when I call them, they say, don't share this information with us. We're already investigating your company, and we can arrest you, right?
Right.
So they discouraged me from going there. I went to court. I represented myself pro se. I went to Lowell Bergman at 2020. I went to Frontline, all these different places. And Nothing. That's why I had to start creating my own media. That's why you were the second person to ever interview me right after Maria Heller was the first person to publish Project Constellation, because nobody else would touch the corporate connections and the history that I was connecting, because I had to go learn it for myself, and I figured, why shouldn't I make this available to other media hosts who are trying to find the facts and connect these dots? Because that's the only way you can see the big picture. You have to study the dots, and after you understand the grammar, logic, and rhetoric of the dots, you can connect them together.
Well, look, in the Technocratic era, by the way, that Brzezinski said in Between Two Ages would be run by a few elite, unrestrained by traditional quote-unquote values. It is a world order run by a few elite with technology, which is why this is so important. What do you know about the software that was taken over by the Defense Department after they stole it and took the creator, forced him into jail, where he remains today, called Promise and Inslaw? Do you have any information on that?
I did look into that a while back because I had worked at a similar company that had developed similar type of artificial intelligence software. Again, this is all in Project Constellation where I detail this. But long story short, from my experience in selling artificial intelligence software to financial institutions and Fortune 100 companies, what they are looking to do is gain an edge. So the way they're using it is not so much we can improve, our bottom line by, just keeping the infrastructure
They trade
working.
in a window of milliseconds.
They're going up against other people who don't have this ability, and so when their trading platform goes down, for instance, on 9/11, Cantor Fitzgerald was the bullion trader for the Treasury, and they handled carbon trading way before Al Gore's movie. And on that day, when their offices disappear, all those contracts, all those trades, they just flip over to J.P. Morgan, who's next in line for it, because somebody has to handle these things. It's mission critical.
Yeah.
Right? So what happened on 9/11 was certain companies did a bunch of disaster recovery beforehand, and they caught other companies with their pants down. And then some of these companies recovered hard drives and bought other companies that were recovering data from hard drives just to have it, and then they started selling it back to the other companies that were victims. So there was you can't just look at 9/11 as the surface view. You have to consider all the relevant evidence, and only then do you really get the finger that points back to history. It says you have to go read what they haven't put in front of you. You have to go seek this information out for yourself, because it's not going to easily – the way they've gotten away with it this long is because there's still a mass of people out there that don't know which books to find which information to, credibly understand it for themselves, let alone communicate with their friends and family. And so everyone leads with the conclusion 9/11 was an inside job. But if you don't explain the step-by-step method by which you drew that conclusion, you can't communicate with the people in the so-called congregation. And it does no good to continue to...
If they're ready to sit and listen to the various octopus and the various tentacles that all come up with it. And look, earlier in Building 7 had all the records. The Pentagon, the part of the Pentagon that got hit had all the records of the missing trillions for the Pentagon. I know this is all just a coincidence. J.P. Morgan is standing right in line and benefiting from 9/11 because earlier we were talking about the hallmarks of a false flag. Richard Andrew Grove is with us, tragedyandhope.com and also peacerevolution.org. But Richard, we said here are the three hallmarks, but there's actually a fourth one that I didn't mention today. The three hallmarks of a false flag operation.
Prior knowledge, stand down, cover up. And the one that you didn't mention would be
who benefits.
What Lippman said was to control the entire scene from investigation and reporting angles, and you can make any lie up for the public that they want to believe.
That's part of the cover up potentially. But I remember Jim Mars asked me, "What is your best evidence that 9/11 was an inside job?" I'm like, "Well, the cover up." And it's like JFK. But
the breaking of they have a protocol which is broken in all these cases. So in the case of 9/11, there's no evidence collection, and within a half hour they're telling you it's Osama bin Laden. So right there, if you're paying attention, those are contradictions.
And
you
who
should
benefits?
Study the contradictions.
And who benefits? Okay, now if I murder somebody, and because I murdered them, I just come into an insurance policy of $1 million. I had the motive, I had the opportunity, I knew the person, I had access to them, I benefit from it, and I participate in covering up of evidence. You think I'm just going to walk away from that?
It depends on how much money you have.
Yeah, right, because all laws are selectively enforced, as I always say.
There's that billionaire in Europe. They found his wife under some trash bags in the yard, and he's just charged with improper burial.
They find dead bodies at Windsor Castle just laying around in the yard.
They find dead bodies under Ben Franklin's house in America and in Britain. And it's children.
Hellfire Club.
So it's not. You can't depend on Snopes. I learned a long time ago because I thought, oh, well, these are all conspiracy theories. And look, Snopes will reinforce my stupidity, right? I can debunk almost anything that Snopes puts out there because they simply are. It's called the fallacy of the frozen aspect, or it's the frozen concept. Fallacy of the frozen concept, where you are excluding relevant information and freezing this one out of context thing. And so, you got to think for yourself.
Well, that's the magic bullet. That's your defense, and that's how you open your mind and you can see, read between the lines without even reading the lines. You just automatically hear a sentence and you go, okay, that's that. And it just relates into your mind, because what I've done, and I know what you do and what you're trying to teach your people to do at tragedyandhope.com, Richard, is to not just have people think for themselves, but they also have to go through an active process of unlearning all the disinformation, propaganda, and fake history that they've been taught to believe in their whole lives. It's politically correct to believe.
Well, the metaphor would be the schooling system. The most valuable thing is your mind. And the schooling system locks your mind up. But you're the one that's locking it up, and you're the only one that can unlock it. And so what we did with the Ultimate History Lesson with John Taylor Gatto was, since I found all this just incredible information and footnotes and resources, primary sources where he was getting his information, I said, we have to interview this. He's a walking historical legacy. Like, he's a national treasure. And so I was like, we have to interview him. And so we interviewed him for 5 hours. He tells this amazing story, giving you all the history you need to understand, like, the situation we're in today, because it just adds up to the idiocracy we're experiencing today. They've taken away our ability to recognize contradictions and to reason. And without that, we're all emotionally controlled. We're all fearful. We're all frustrated, aggressive, semi-violent, without the tools of asking the questions and answering them for ourselves. And without those tools, everybody becomes someone who could be a James Holmes, basically.
Yeah.
And so what we wanted to do was provide people with a family library, a resource that keeps on giving, because we know professionals, doctors, lawyers, other people who are supposed to have, like, this authority in our culture. And they write to us and say, look, I've listened to that 5 or 6 times. I listen to it while I'm mowing grass or I'm running, between city to city in my car. And so people of the highest intellectual aptitude can dig into that, as well as just, we've had, young kids, we've had grandparents, we've had parents, people from PTAs, everybody who digs into it and takes it seriously, because he tells a story that's 5 hours long. You don't really get to the exciting part to hours 3, 4, and 5, but you need hours 1 and 2 to, that's the beginning of the story. You start to learn, his style of thinking and arguing with himself to come up with his own unique perspectives that are drawn from all the best primary sources through the past 2,500 years. So really, it's just like, it's such a great keystone that no university is offering, although they are using it now in some universities for teaching and for offering extra credit for some other people. So there's a lot of interesting ways it's being used out there. But he'll basically tell you can get a world-class education for next to nothing. Like, it shouldn't cost you a penny, and here's how to do it. Here's how he taught his students to do it. And the reason he quit in 1992 as the school teacher of the year in New York City and New York State is because he found out he was being used as the best teacher to abuse the rest of the children, that he was reinforcing a system that was there to intentionally hurt our best minds and to prevent us as a country. So they basically bred the freedom and liberty out of us. They've bred out the self-reliance. And what they've bred into us, the values change and the behaviors change, that's the definition of brainwashing, by the way, that they've made, is we are now reliant on experts and not self-reliance. We're now worshiping money and external superficial bullshit things instead of what you can bring as far as happiness to each other and constructive things that you can do with your person, your property, your rights, defend yourself, which gets back to the Second Amendment. If the Second Amendment is the root cause of these latest shootings, then why haven't we had this problem for the last 200 years? Right?
Well, why did it all of a sudden pop up after Columbine and then all the copycats?
Because they want to pass legislation. It's all Hegelian dialectic.
Well, one of the benefits.
If you take away people's legal right to bear arms, you enlarge the black markets. Crazy people shouldn't have guns. That's true. But sane people shouldn't be without them.
Oh, and then if you're selling arms in the black market like the Bush crime family has done, as well as drugs, then your product becomes worth more as it's less available and harder to get. And then we saw this is why, of course, with the Bush administration and the Obama administration, it wasn't just Obama fast and furious. It was Bush and wide receiver. This has been going on forever.
Talking about the British Empire
the guns
and their whole
to the cartels.
Jack.
Yeah, well,
I mean, that's Obama, Bush. It doesn't matter who's paying to rent that White House. I don't care who pays to rent that White House. It's a single agenda that's gone on here since like 1820, when the Rothschilds started funding the Manifest Destiny campaign, and then they sent their son, the spy Sigmund Solomon de Rothschild in 1859 and 1860. You can read his personal letters. And he was sent here as a spy to undermine and create the Civil War, like give them the information to financially manipulate the North and South.
Because Jackson was defying orders and trying to end the central banks and create and coin our own money, which is the big deal. We can go into all of that, but here's what we've got to do. We're going to run out of time for the live show. Richard Andrew Grove with us from tragedyandhope.com, peacerevolution.org. But I want to keep you for the 15 more minutes so that we can complete the show for our archive listeners, where most of our listeners are. But for people who are on the No Agenda stream or the Talk stream live or any of the streams you're listening to us live today, for the last, in 2 minutes here, I want you to tell people how to get the ultimate history lesson, because this is awesome, folks, and I want you to know where to get this. Repeat it a few times. How can people get their hands on John Taylor Gatto's huge CD set, The Ultimate History Lesson? Then I'll take a break, and we'll come back and finish up in 10 minutes.
Right on. Well, everything I'm talking about is available directly on tragedyandhope.com. If you can't afford to buy a disc set, we offer the whole Ultimate History Lesson for free. It's also analyzed in Peace Revolution, our podcast, episodes 41 through 45. So there's plenty of stuff out there for people who might be unemployed or not have the cash to help John in this situation. But if you want to help John, you can go to theultimatehistorylesson.com. We have something called the Gatto Fundraiser Pack. It's under items for purchase. And we just visited John and Janet last weekend. He is in a dire state of health. He suffered multiple strokes last year, and he's been in rehab for the past 11 months. He just got out, and we wanted to go see him. And he's lost 100 pounds. He's lost half his body weight. What he looks like on the cover of the Ultimate History Lesson, I mean, it almost brought me to tears the other day when I was just trying to put some links together, because then I looked at the cover of the DVD, which was just taken last summer, and I compared it to what I saw last weekend. So we have put together a plan of action to help him. And if you want access to that, you can just send me an email, richard@tragedyandhope.com. It's a private link that we provided to all the producers of the Ultimate History Lesson, but I'd be glad to share it with anyone who can help them.
TheUltimateHistoryLesson.com, catalog, Gatto fundraiser pack, and I guess if people mention Jack Blood, they get a little bit of a discount or something. You going to help them out?
Yeah, we're gonna help. We're gonna help you out, Jack, because that is something that we need help with. And if you enter the coupon code JackBlood, it's a small discount. We'll give you some extra free discs, but the discount on there is just to make sure we pay the right partner. So anything that you can do to help Jack, that would be great. I can send you some banners that you can put up on your site, and then you can continue to have
we did
people
want
help
to
out.
do that for sure. Okay, so we'll talk more about this. I want to stay with Richard for the next 15 minutes. It's you're so busy, it's so hard to get you. I want to get you on as much as I can, and especially for our listening audience. We'll promote this again in the archive. If you didn't see any of this, it'll all be in the text body of our archive up at deadlinelive.info later tonight, as well as this interview in its entirety and the interview we did earlier. Quickly, before we lose the live audience, you were asking Dan where Echoes of Columbine was. I'll send you the link, but again, you can Google, or I hate Google, search, Dogpilot, whatever, Rolf Zeschmar, Z-A-E-S-C-H-M-A-R, Rolf Zeschmar, Columbine. The body of work is at signofthetimes.com in one of the back pages. It's actually a forum, so you can participate in that. You can add your own research, ask questions from Rolf, who's been investigating Columbine since it happened. Echoes of Columbine is the name of the forum and the page. So sometimes, Rich, we say things so fast here, you're trying to move on and everything, that people don't get it. They can't write it down fast enough, and I hate that. All right, so
that's why they have the archive, so they can re-listen. That was a great interview with Rolf, by the way.
Thank you. Well, he was great. All right, here's what we're going to do. Well, I think we probably just lost him. So just for the sake of continuity, I'll quickly play a break. And thank you, Adam and John. No Agenda Show. Take it over.
See, in my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over and over again for the truth to sink in, to kind of catapult the propaganda.
All right, truth protectors, lie detectors, thank you for staying with us here. It's the Jack Blood Show, final 15 minutes. This is the best part. I actually kind of like this because we're off the clock now. I don't have to talk as fast as I can to get everything on. I don't have to talk to a live audience. It's just completely relaxed, casual, talking to my old buddy, Richard Andrew Grove at tragedyandhope.com, peacerevolution.org. Richard, like myself, does a regular monthly show with Maria Heller. My show is Blood and Guts, and you can find all of that at Maria, with an E, M-E-R-I-A, Maria.com. Richard, cool to have you. Thanks for staying.
Great to be here. I think it's Maria.net.
Maria.net, M-E-R-I-A, Maria.net. But the link is, I have a big, giant link for her at deadlinelive.info. No problem. Just click right on that. And she is amazing. She's just absolutely a jewel, a gem, a diamond in the rough, and one of my good friends for almost 15 years now.
Well,
we're lucky to have her.
That goes way back into the live radio days before she started her show. I think she's been doing her live internet show for 12 years, I think.
We discovered her. No. I think she discovered us, one of the two, but we did give her a 50,000-watt radio show in Phoenix, Arizona, middle of the dial, where she had at least the first or the second most popular show on our station.
Well, it's only because of her fantastic interview style that I happened to come across her in my own research, and then I had the faith. I was like, if I send her this Project Constellation disc, I think she'll listen. And it was Memorial Day 2006, so it's been 6 years since that little bit of magic happened, and it's continued to pay off.
Greenspan on Friday received the Freedom of the City of London medal for his accomplishments.
But of course.
Bob Woodward.
So Greenspan's the same thing. His dad wrote him a book on how to become, the Fed chairman, and his dad had worked with Henry Morgenthau from the Treasury back under FDR. So, the fascinating part for me was, I thought because I had gone to college, I had graduated, I'd gotten a good job, I'd made a bunch of money, I thought I knew everything, right? And that was preventing me from doing a lot of discovery, right? There's a great quote by Daniel Boorstin. It says, the greatest barrier to knowledge is not illusion. It's not. Fuck! I messed up your quote. This is archive only, right?
Yeah.
All right. So the idea is that illusion's the barrier to discovery. So.
Cracking illusion, or you know what? This is the whole thing. Even understanding that there are illusions. It's so difficult to try to talk to somebody who is living. And I know this is a tired metaphor, but The Matrix, and the Matrix movie was. I mean, that was kind of the Brave New World of our time. That is the 1984 of our. I really believe that, because it's so exactly right down to the point where the machines see us as batteries. And when you look into the research, we are batteries. Not only are we, slaves and whatnot, but we're literally, the carbon in our body, the heat in our body could be tapped in for an energy source.
Well, it's like, I saw The Matrix, and like anyone else, I was like, oh, we're like batteries. Okay. So there's this whole metaphor going on. When I came across Chapter 9 of Gatto's book, The Underground History of American Education, it's called The Scientific Dictatorship, and he calls it the cult of scientific management. And he goes through and explains how they went through a scientific process to make us into batteries, and that metaphor in The Matrix is not just a metaphor that's accurate. There's a ton of interesting history that's tied into it. And so he's talking about H.G. Wells in his book Open Conspiracy, and the New Machiavellis and the New World Order, and all these different rich historical texts that were imprinted on society by the Fabian socialists, and those are the same people who were behind it's a mentality, right? It's a philosophy.
It brings a whole new angle to the nihilist statement that I know Nietzsche and others had made, that nothing is true, everything is permitted.
Okay, so that's called solipsism. So to fix my quote, the quote by Daniel Boorstin, who's a Librarian of Congress and a Rhodes Scholar, is, the greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. Now, you just mentioned Nietzsche. This idea of solipsism, the fact there's a bunch of polymaths, like from Oxford, Bertrand Russell, Ludwig Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein wrote Tractatus Politico Philosophicus. Tractatus Logicus Politicus, something like that, TLP. And this, I have people in my office who are laughing at me. So
nice.
No, well,
that must be good.
So, here's the point. They basically will draw out. This is all cybernetics. They'll draw out A and B. And they'll say the difference in our philosophies are some people put a plus here and some people want to multiply it. And they use that to philosophically justify things that do not exist. So they say this rational concept of objective reality is equal to this concept that we just create our own reality and make up truth at will, right? So what they've done is they've provided a philosophical argument based on fallacies that equates their predatory nature. If I had to use the proper term, we're talking about intraspecific kleptoparasites. Intraspecific meaning they are of the same species, and kleptoparasites meaning they are plundering people who produce and living off them. That's the source of their wealth. So whether it's the speculators with the Libor and the naked short selling and the dividends and the derivatives, all this muck that's out there, all this quagmire of crime, right? Yeah. There's a simple way to look at this through history, but you have to first be able to discern reality from illusion, subjective, arbitrary things from things that are substantial and objective, right? And so it was in that line of study where I was like, wow, if the schooling system has taken away our ability to discern reality from illusion, then we've got 300 million people around us who are at the beck and
easily
call.
Programmed with 5,000, they call them channels of programming with your direct TV, which at some point they're going to have go through your phone right into your brain. I want to go back to something we were talking about, human batteries, because the science now with nanotechnology, with army robots such as the Carlyle Group robot. How can these guys sustain themselves in the field? Well, first of all, how can they recognize the enemy? The friendlies have to be chipped, so you have to take a chip to be a friendly, so these Carlyle robots or these nanotech robots won't kill you. But it is also how they feed in the field is that you can't go out there and oil them or put gas in them or recharge their battery, and solar doesn't always work. So what they've done, Rich, is this. They've taught these machines how to feed themselves on organic material, which could be anything, could be garbage, could be vegetation, could be humans, right? They now, with this artificial intelligence put into them, and with nanotechnology even taking this a step far beyond what we've even imagined, they will now they can feed on humans and animals and vegetation and live forever. As long as their mechanics don't break down, and that's the other problem. Now, this has brought us to something called the gray goo. Have you heard of the gray goo?
I'm not familiar with the gray goo.
It's nanotechnology out of control. You can Google this, or you can go search for this, and there's tons of weird research on this by very intelligent people, including Kurzweil and others, talking about how the nanotechnology goes to create these little tiny nanobots that to all get together in kind of this cloud, which is called gray goo, and they just eat everything in their path. So I guess we really are fodder for the machines. Whether the machines ultimately take over or are going to still be controlled by real people,
well,
we don't know.
So the function of our that paints a bleak picture. So what's the root cause? We are surrounded by people who do not have intellectual self-defense. We are surrounded by people who do not realize their voluntary role in their own servitude. We don't have to love our servitude. We can recognize it and plan a method for freedom. And so when you get down to it, I published a podcast a couple weeks ago. So it was Peace Revolution, maybe episode 59. It introduced a character named Etienne de la Boétie. And he lived around in the 1500s, around the same time as Machiavelli. And while Machiavelli is writing a book for the elite on how to control us, he was writing a book for the population on how to be free. And basically, it's called the Discourse on Voluntary Servitude. And what he's telling you is all these things that are being used to enslave us, that's part of the New World Order, so to speak, because the Old World Order was the use of spears and knives and cages to literally control you by force, but that takes a lot of resources. So the way the elite evolved was they could get more out of us if they gave us this, this quote-unquote freedom and keep the real definition of freedom and self-reliance away from people. And then they started this experiment called America, and they needed people to be more free and self-reliant. But then they came back in and they're like, oh, that's all great. You guys created that, but we know exactly how to take it over again because we're students of history and we can just control your money system.
We've got drones in the sky. You look back, and Rich, if we're talking about people that have microchips, they swallow microchips in pills that can be controlled by a wireless device.
That's
which
crazy,
is,
right?
Which is put out by IBM, the same people that tracked the people in the Holocaust.
Chip, yeah,
right. All this, but you go back and you go, this is what technology is going to look like in 2012. It's going to be a complete technotronic police state. They're going to be drones flying over the sky, attacking people, monitoring people. The president's going to have an assassination list. He's going to come out and talk about it. We're going to be funding Al Qaeda. La la la. People will go, you're crazy. That's nuts. You're going to be forced to wear your seatbelt, or you're going to go to jail. I mean, you're just talking about this stuff. People will go, you're completely out of your mind.
It just worries me because H.G. Wells wrote a book about a time machine. So, what are we being, I argue that there's no one in control right now, that it's a corrupt philosophy, and if you took out the superclass, like if you could just make them disappear hypothetically, the other people would just jump right in and be more ruthless and more irrational because they don't know the value of a little stability in a crime syndicate. Like there's going to be divide and conquer within their own, ruling class, because there are people who want to keep the establishment, like, don't do this too fast. And there are other people like, no, we just have to put the harness around everybody right away. And they're like, whoa, you're doing it too fast. The frog's going to jump out of the pot, and the young ones will have to learn. But the way that they're taking 20 years of planning right now, and that was supposed to happen over the next 20 years, for instance. And they're stacking it all and trying to do it all now. They're doing the TSA at the same time. They're doing all this mass shoot up. They're doing just all this stuff, and it's becoming very, very obvious to people. And if you look at any of the history, I mean, look at the Reichstag and who they blamed, and the Enabling Act, whatever their Patriot Act was. I mean, the same thing's going on here. So you can follow their plans. They wrote this stuff down. They don't want you to read it. The best thing you could do is, that's why I put the curriculum out. The Peace Revolution is a podcast you can listen to. It's got all the references, and you start jumping into the books. Go to your library, find some of these books, get them used on abe.com for $1. It's the best money that you can invest, because gold can't read back. Like, gold's not telling you a story. These things, you could use them for firewood if you had to. You could burn them if you had to. But it's an investment that helps you embody your mind, like empower your mind. And mind is worth way more than money. You see what inflation is doing. What's really valuable right now are people who have the facts of what's going on and can talk about it without drawing everybody's emotions or talking about things that are arbitrary.
Yeah, well, by the way, the Fed is controlling inflation. That's why we've lost 99% of our dollar, and the people go, the Fed is part of the government, and
draining the value.
They have reserves, and they're just controlling. Yeah, that's why bread cost twice as much as it did 2 years ago, and that's why I can't find a place to live in Austin, Texas.
Hyperinflation in Germany in the 20s.
I'm on the on the no rent list, and pretty soon I'm going to be on the no food list. I'm basically on the no fly list. You don't comply with this new technology. You don't comply with the credit rating as your ultimate purpose in life. You don't comply with having all your biometric IDs. You're going to be forced out of the system, and this is happening right now. Right now, it's happening.
You're not alone, because I stopped with the credit stuff and using banks and all that stuff 8 years ago, 9 years ago. So if I had to, to go rent someplace, I got no credit anymore. I mean, I can tell you an interesting story of what I've done for the past 10 years, but it's not going to come across from, one of those 4 companies.
Yeah.
TransUnion.
Well, and we're back to Libor again, I guess. Hey, you mentioned something very interesting that I thought was
Money's a harness used to control human resources.
You mentioned something really interesting, though. Let me go back to this, because you're talking about, right now we're seeing this so-called phony class warfare thing being played out in the media between CIA model Obama, cousin Obama, and cousin Romney, Obamney. It's all a bunch of crap. But you mentioned something really important. I want people to understand what you said, that if you eliminate the whole elite class, most of this is still built into the program and will go on. There was a movie called Land of the Blind, which I really recommend people see. The what I call the Illuminati movie distribution chain didn't want you to see it. It was a great film, and they basically, the head of the revolution, you can fill in the blank with anyone who you think is your leader leading the revolution. They kill the junior, the president of the world, and they get rid of all these people, and they take over, and that's exactly what happens. They're worse than their predecessors.
That's interesting, because someone who listened to my podcast worked at the studio that produced Land of the Blind, and they wanted to come work for us at one point, and we thought that was kind of funny, because we're like, we have no money, we can't hire you. They sent us a bunch of their movies, and that was one of the films. I know exactly what you're talking about. And so, we just have to take a step back. We are human beings. We have certain needs of survival. There are people here who make their living off of trying to control our actions of getting like that those needs for survival satiated. So they've taxed us, they've put all these laws and legislation. These are just all artificial ways to use words to control human resources so some other people can live without having to do a bunch of hard work. So that's the nature of history through time. And so we're just dealing at a very specific part of history where they are at. Look, a couple hundred years ago, Hegel noticed that the natural nature, the intended nature of human beings is to be, as individuals, free. And so he's telling the ruling class this, and they're like, wow, we are obsolete. We have to string this out as long as possible before people become free, right? Now, they're trying to use the internet to put a closer, net on us and be able to track all our actions, but what are we using it for? We're using it not for our own vanity, not to watch porn, not to do any of these things. We are trying to learn history, and we're trying to communicate what we've learned with other interested people and try to, act like a magnet and attract some people who are thinking about what's there, using their five senses, forming concepts, removing the contradictions, organizing that, and communicating. It's a very simple method that they didn't allow us to internalize in school. And so the Peace Revolution podcast is meant to just continually reinforce that while introducing you to history, while elongating your attention span so you can take in more information, so you can make their model obsolete. So all of this stuff we're talking about, yes, it's very bad. They are very far along on their plan. But we have numbers on our side. We don't need everybody to understand this. So don't worry about people who you try to interact with and they just don't want to hear it. Great. They are not going to be the majority in the future, and it's not even about having a majority. We only need 3 to 10% of people to have intellectual self-defense, to start demonstrating it to other people, because it's very easy to catch on. I mean, when you're talking about the superclass, what's running the planet is a philosophic corruption of reality. Solipsism, the belief that no objective reality exists and they can do anything they want, they can harness hurt us like cattle. The book would be Superclass by David Rothkopf, which is funded by the Carnegie Institute Endowment for International Peace and the Council on Foreign Relations. He's a member of both. He's telling you these are the 6,000 people who run the world that you know about, right? So he'll still act like Bill Gates is the richest dude in the world and yada, yada, yada. So he's just telling you here's the bottom echelon of worker bees, right? These aren't evil people either. They're just people who've gone through life without asking substantial questions and finding valid answers, right? So I don't have any animosity or hate. I don't go around being all angry. I'm just dealing with the history that I see, and I'm trying to,
Well, no, you have to reinforce your own goal, your own search for higher consciousness. And as you mentioned, this is not going to be this is something that cannot be put down, though if they're ever going to be able to do it, they can do it with technology, which is why I always said, and I'm not angry, sometimes I get pissed off, okay, but I'm not, I'm trying not to be angry about it. I'm trying to be thorough in my thinking and to work with other people that are the same. But ultimately here, this is why our generation is so different than any other generation. And I'm not giving us a grandiose importance, but we do have to understand that with nanotechnology, with DNA sciences and brain sciences and satellites and space technology and the cyberspace and the more complex technotronic era mentioned by Brzezinski of the Matrix, if we don't have some way to monitor this, if we don't have some way to countermand all of this, I really think we're in very serious danger of dooming every future generation into this matrix mind control model. It's unprecedented.
We can only doom them if they fail to be exposed to what's going on right now. Because what you're looking at is something that has repeated through history, and the way to get it to stop is to get enough people to be aware that even if they do get some sort of technotronic grid on us, the ruling class rules through use of force. That is irrational. Their Achilles heel is that whatever they make up, whatever they do, they will never be right. They'll always be unnatural.
Brave New World read Brave New World Revisited, compares it to 1984. You can't punish people into this submission. You have to get them to beg for it. And I'm not just talking about surveillance and technology, because that's just only part of it. I'm talking about GMO people, Rich. That's what I'm talking about. And I don't want to see that happen. I really think because, again, the technology, the advancements in technology is something none of our predecessors, none of our grandparents or any of this had.
But they all need people to volunteer to maintain it. So Kurzweil's wet dream, he wants to be in a computer? Great. Let's put him in a computer and I'll kick the plug out. That's not a problem. There's irrational people who are preying on us, and they prey on our children, all the Vatican pedophilia, like all that Penn State stuff. Look into who Louis Freeh is. That's He's a very
FBI
interesting
director,
character. Search Louis Free plus Opus Dei. You'll see why they put the lid on that. And if you want to see what I mean by putting the lid, UltimateHistoryLesson.com, under the interview, there's a trailer and a clip where John talks about how he realized that he's the lid on the jar being used to train the fleas. And that's been going on for thousands of years, and it's a simple, understandable concept, and then you'll understand what Free's brought in there for. He's not there to cover up Penn State. He's there to keep it from – they're amputating Penn State to save the body of the organized services of those children providers.
Didn't Louis – exactly. That was the speediest trial you ever saw in the world. Didn't Louis Free – wasn't he the FBI director that came out and said, look, before he retired, didn't he say something like I can't tell you what I know about 9/11, but just look into the Bushes and the Bin Ladens being in business together. Didn't he say something like that?
He did. He said something like that. What I could say is I can't tell you about 9/11, but I can say watch the movie Who Killed John O'Neill. Because remember when we talked about that 6 years ago? He tells you that Morgenthau is running the DA's office. He's training Spitzer, Giuliani, everyone that's involved in this whole thing. Patrick Fitzgerald that was involved with prosecuting Spitzer. Like, those dudes all played on the same team. And Louis Free wasn't under Morgenthau, but he worked at U.S. District Attorney's Office for he was a federal officer in the same area that this whole other. We talked about that.
And he was the first one that got accosted, and when it was revealed by whistleblowers that the CIA and everybody was, I believe he had.
If you want to know more about that,
drug dealing in the CIA, and there's a great a clip of him being attacked by an entire town in Los Angeles over this. I think that's him as well. Hey, I'm going to get you out of here, but I got to tell you, you've definitely earned a lot of fans on our show today, and I think you're going to see them around tragedyandhope.com. Tell people, I know you do a newsletter. How can they subscribe to what you do over there? You kind of have like a Facebook of your own, I think, over there, from what I remember. Tragedyandhope.com. Tell people, please, about what you're doing and how they can get involved, and we'll get you out of here.
Sure. On the main site, tragedyandhope.com, on the main menu, there's a link for you can get a free invitation if you listen to the show to the community. And in the community, there's a live chat. We post blogs. We do live shows. There's all sorts of things that go on in the community. It's basically used for research and communication of what we research before we publish it publicly to the public through our productions. And so I also teach in the Peace Revolution podcast. So it's peacerevolution.org or it's under the audio on the main menu at tragedyandhope.com. And if you jump into any of those episodes, listen to a couple episodes, and then you'll see where it's going. So it's all about teaching yourself. I'm not there to tell you what to think. I'm there to try to show you how I'm learning how to think for myself. And by reflecting that out to others, people seem to dig it because they can take their own journey, but we all have something in common, that we're talking about objective reality. And that makes for some very interesting conversations as we grow.
Well, and you're a great presenter. I'm a little scatterbrained because this is what happens. I work by myself. I'm doing my website. I'm booking the guests. I'm talking to sponsors. I'm working in 1,000 directions. I'm a father of a 9-year-old. I'm trying to find a place to live. It's crazy being me. I try to keep myself as organized as possible, but sometimes that's just not my personality, Rich. I just gotta let it go. But you're a great presenter, and I think very credible for people to share with their friends, family, people who might still be in the Matrix. And I got to go back and watch the Ultimate History Lesson, which you sent me. I think it's been about 9 months since I've seen that. I'm going to go back and watch it again after listening to you today. The UltimateHistoryLesson.com and TragedyandHope.com and PeaceRevolution.org. Rich, I love you, man. You're a great friend of ours, a great friend of the show. You're an amazing guy, and I hope more people find out about you and turn you on to their friends.
Hey, I'm happy to help you anytime you need someone to come on here and offer a little historical perspective, because that's what I do.
He is the man. All right, hold on. If you have a few seconds, I wanted to talk to you off air. And so, folks, that will do it for this edition Backstage today with Richard Andrew Grove. We only do that for our very special guest. We'll be back tomorrow. If you're listening to this podcast tonight, got Adam Armstrong from Rebel Inc., a great truth band out there that should be signed immediately. We're going to rock you out tomorrow and end Friday with our open line edition of the show. Until then, I'm Jack Blood saying be bold, and mighty forces will come to your aid. You've been listening to The Jack Blood Show, sponsored by you, our great listeners and supporters. Tune in tomorrow, same time, same channel, for The Jack Blood Show, and check out our information always as we publish it 24 hours a day at deadlinelive.info. And stay bold. Mighty forces will come to your aid.